I'll be sharing in a moment 5 phases of faith. Before I do, I want to welcome a second guest I have today, and he's somebody really special to me. Part of the reason is he's a graduate of my own alma mater, Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and he's one of America's most distinguished and youngest congressmen who's spent 11 years already in Washington, and someday if he's the President of the United States, I just wanted you to know that we were friends before he became President, okay? I want to welcome now Congressman Guy Vander Jagt. Guy, it's great having you with us.
It's a thrill and an inspiration to be here. I
Boy.
feel as though at home I've seen this so often, as many of my colleagues do in Washington, D.C.
Tell people who never heard of Hope College, where is it and what is it? If I do it, they'll think I'm puffing it too much.
It's easy to tell what it is. It's the greatest college in the United States of America.
That's right. You're right on. That's right.
It's in Holland, Michigan, on the shores of Lake Michigan, and it's a church-related college. I think that America needs those church-related colleges, but I think the best of them all is Hope College.
Thank you. Now we got that great plug-in for Old Hope. How did you get into politics?
Well, I went to Hope on my way to the ministry. I was going to be a preacher. I had attended between my junior and senior year in high school a church summer camp. It was a real mountaintop experience for me, so when I got back home and our minister said he was overburdened with a second church that he had to take care of, and would I please take it over for him, still in the glow of that mountaintop experience, I said yes, I would become the preacher of that little church in Tustin, Michigan. And my very first sermon, my very first Sunday, I had just turned 17, and they were so proud because they'd turned everybody out and they had the biggest congregation of all time, and it was 18 people. Had a wonderful year there, and on my way to the ministry, in fact, I had finished 2 of the 3 years of theological training at Yale Divinity School when I received a Rotary Foundation fellowship to study in Germany for a year. That was still close enough to World War II, and democracy was still new enough to them that I could see how Hitlerism could happen. Became convinced that people have to work at democracy and live it and commit themselves to it, and it was then that I decided that my calling was public service rather than church service. I did go back and finish at Yale so that it wouldn't look like I got kicked out or couldn't get my degree, but from there, I went to law school and on into politics.
Into law school, into politics, and you've been in Washington 11 years.
Yes.
You know, at one time, Guy, we had 2 congressmen that were members of this congregation. One was a Republican and one was a Democrat. The Democrat was Clyde Doyle, and the Republican was your friend Jimmy Yutt.
Jimmy Yutt had a great influence on my career in Congress. One of my very first days, I went to the House prayer breakfast, which meets each Thursday morning. And Congressman Jimmy Yutt from this church came over afterwards, and he said, "Young man, you'll find that your greatest experience in Washington will be this prayer breakfast group." And I thought he was exaggerating just a little bit, because I thought congressmen rubbed shoulders with kings and queens and talked with prime ministers, and how could that little group be the highlight of the whole congressional experience? I found out that Jimmy Yutt then, as he usually did, was telling it like it is. And for those who meet, those 40 or so every Thursday morning, I think all of them would say that the richest experience of serving in Washington is that house prayer breakfast. Incidentally, I don't think there are many churches in America with only 435 members who can get 40 people out to a prayer breakfast every Thursday morning, every week of the year.
Thank you for sharing that, Guy, because another reason I'm happy to have you is I think there are many Americans who have the feeling that politicians are all, lacking in integrity or morality or commitment. And I would not have welcomed my friend Guy here if I didn't know what he was from way back. There isn't a flaky thing in him. He's honest, he's great, and he isn't alone. There are many great people like him in Congress on both political sides of the fence. We have mutual friends on both sides.
I thank you for those words, and as you say, I'm not the exception, I'm the rule. There are committed, dedicated men on both sides of the aisle, and they are in the great majority. It's just too bad that a few bad apples and people read about the escapades don't know the committed, dedicated side of Congress. We have a little prayer chapel right in the heart of the Capitol, that gets frequent use, and the heavier and more important the decision, the more frequent and heavy is the trooping of the congressman to that prayer chapel where they can be alone with God.
Guy, I know one contribution you made to America, and lots of people here in this audience are the beneficiaries of it, and I bet you that's your proudest moment. You introduced some legislation. What was it?
It was to establish a National Diabetes Commission. A lady came into my office in my constituency, and she had 5 diabetic children and felt America wasn't doing enough to conquer that disease. After many years of work, my bill passed. It passed 387 to 6, by the way. Most of the things we do in Washington are not partisan. They're just men working together to solve problems. But that commission gave a report to the president 2 years after its establishment. I was privileged to go with the head of the commission, and he reported to the President of the United States that within the foreseeable future, it is possible that we will eliminate juvenile diabetes from America. When I left the White House, I thought, if I never ever do another thing, it will be worthwhile to have been there.
That's fantastic. Guy, we have another thing in common. Both of us are 100% Holland Dutch extraction, and we won't start talking Dutch. But what was your most inspiring moment? And with that, I think we'll let you fly back to the Capitol. But tell us your most inspiring moment.
Oh, that's very easy. A little over a year ago, I was invited to a black-tie dinner at the White House. There were only 28 guests, but they were star-studded. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, your very good friend, Senator Hubert Humphrey. In fact, it was so star-studded that there were only 2 House members who were invited. And because the dinner was to honor the Dutch Prime Minister, I think you might see how they happened to select us. One was Congressman Vander Veen, a Democrat from Michigan, and the other was me, Congressman Vander Jagt, a Republican from Michigan. But that happened to be the night that the President had sent the Marines in to rescue the Mayaguez and its missing crew. And through that whole dinner, messages were coming and going, and we didn't know if they would find the crew or whether what would happen, or even the potentiality of World War III. In fact, it was so exciting that it overcame my sense of propriety, and I guess I lingered a little longer than my relatively low rank would have merited. So when it was time for the Dutch Prime Minister to leave, there were only 4 of us to walk him to the door. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Secretary of State, the President of the United States, and me. And as we walked through the marble of that foyer and the beautifully illuminated columns and down the front steps to his limousine, the Dutch Prime Minister thanked each of us for the honor that we had given him and all of the people of the Netherlands through him by entertaining him there in the White House. And as I stood there, my mind reached back 50 years before, when my father, a 16-year-old Dutch immigrant with $1.25 in his pocket, stood on the docks of Hoboken. And when he stood there, he was dreaming. He was dreaming impossible dreams. He dreamed that if he worked hard someday, he might own his own modest home, that someday he'd have his own transportation, his own horse and buggy. And if he really worked hard, maybe he could give to his children what he had never been able to have, a high school diploma, and maybe even on to college. But if anybody had told that little Dutch boy on the docks of Hoboken that someday a child of his would be standing in front of the White House being thanked by the Dutch Prime Minister, he would have said, "That's impossible." Not even in America. Or if they had told him, that little boy, that one day a child of his would be in this great church and speaking on a national television audience about his career, he would have said, "That's impossible." I know that America is a place where impossible dreams come true. And that's why I said at the beginning that the scores of congressmen who watch the hour of power have come to think that here is the hope for America. You know, there's no law or program that we can develop that can do what this ministry can do. And that is to make a person realize that God loves him, and because God loves him, he can love himself, so that he can say to God, "I love you, not so much for what you are, but for what I am, when I am with you. I love you for reaching your hand into my heaped up heart and passing over all those weak, foolish possessions you can't help seeing there, and drawing out into the light all of the beautiful things that no one else looked far enough to find. I love you.
not so much for what you are, but for what I am when I am with you. And it is that sense of worth in the individual that gives him pride and ambition and self-esteem, makes him as aware of the potentialities that I think can help our people. You know, we'll be adding 16 million people to the welfare rolls in the next couple of years alone. We tend to make people more dependent. This message makes men and women who love themselves because God loves them, and then they build better lives for themselves and their children, and in the process build a better country. That's why I think this is the hope for the future of America, just as it was the basis of our greatness in the past.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the thrill
God
of
loves you,
being with
so do I.
Thank
Okay.
you.